So, if you're looking for a man in finance to help make sense of the state's current and future forecasts, look no further. We're now joined by Senate File 853's chief author and ranking minority leader of the Senate's Finance Committee, Republican Senator Eric Pratt. Senator, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So, Senator, talk me through your thoughts on where the state currently is with its financial situation.
So, what we've seen in the management and budget forecast reiterates what we saw in November, that we have basically spent the entire $18 billion surplus, and we are now faced with a $6 billion deficit. And I think that's going to be the legacy of the one-party control that we saw. Every one of our budget bills passed on essentially a party line vote.
And I was going to ask, was this avoidable, considering we had this, forecast in November, we have the one that came out just recently, and that gap actually widened. Was that avoidable?
I don't know if the widening was avoidable, but I think the situation we find ourselves in was. We essentially increased state spending by 40%, and we taxed Minnesotans, every Minnesota family, an extra $10 billion. And yet we went from what was a $6 billion structural surplus, meaning that the state was bringing in $6 billion more each biennium than we were spending. We're now at effectively a $5 billion structural deficit, which is just amazing because it goes beyond what we've heard the administration say are the key drivers of our structural deficit and of our looming budget deficit.
And Senator, you're part of the team who gets the first crack at balancing the state's budget. What do you think needs to be kept at the forefront during those discussions?
I think we have to be looking at what's important to Minnesota families and where can we pare back in some of the spending that we've already done. I think the second piece is looking at the number of state employee positions that we authorized but haven't filled yet. When I worked in the private sector, before we laid anybody off, we at least did a freeze on new hiring, and we authorized about 1,000 new state positions last biennium, last budget, and not all of those are filled. And so I think we should be looking at ways to bringing that back. There are parts of paid family medical leave that we can make more efficient and less onerous on taxpayers by doing a public-private partnership, which was a bill that I sponsored and am sponsoring again this year.
Senator, during its latest budget forecast presentation, MB said there's a lot of uncertainty at the moment, particularly as it relates to the federal government. Talk me through some of those uncertainties that you guys are working with and the impact they could have on our budget.
There's uncertainties in every budget cycle. We had uncertainties when the Biden administration was increasing the federal deficit, and we saw inflation that crept up higher than we expected. There are uncertainties certainly with the tariffs and the stock market, and even today what we're seeing in consumer sentiment and retail sales. Our economy is in an interesting situation where we're getting some good news and some bad news. And I think, what the Fed does as far as interest rates will have a lot to say about that. But that's out of our control. We've got to quit blaming Washington because this was a situation that we found out about in November, well before the new administration was in place. And so we need to take accountability for our own actions, and we need to address it here at the state.
How do you move forward given the unknowns, like at the federal level, but maybe there are some here at the state level too, right? So how do you factor that in?
I think it's about being reasonable in what you're proposing. For instance, certainly we want to make sure that our schools have the resources they need. But was it responsible to increase state spending 40%? Was it responsible to hire or create 1,000 new state employee positions that would have an ongoing impact? And then if you look at the governor's proposed budget, is it responsible to shift nursing home care and some of the school pieces down to the counties doesn't change the cost to Minnesota families. It just means that they're going to be paying their taxes to somebody else. In Scott County, our commissioners have said that we'll see almost a one-to-one shift in property tax. And the Walls budget would be the largest property tax increase in state history.
Senator, when we hear about the imbalance and we hear, we think to cuts immediately, but and you mentioned perhaps hiring freezes for unfilled positions. Do we have other options on the table as far as balancing the budget or growing the economy?
Now that we've got the February forecast, we're looking at all of that. Where did we spend money on an ongoing basis that maybe we should pull back? Where do we have one-time funds that aren't spent yet, and maybe we should rethink some of those? And then again, the open positions, I think we need to take a look at. Those are three quick ones that I can think of, and I'm sure we'll come up with more as we work through the committee process and we continue to dive in to each agency's budget.
I also know that there was a big push from your caucus regarding finding out fraud, waste, and abuse, right? That could be another opportunity to help with the balanced budget.
Yeah, the fraud and waste in particular is frustrating. It seems like a week doesn't go by when we don't hear about another case of fraud. We're up in excess of $600 million already. And lost fraud. And I think what's even more frustrating is when we see the governor's agencies not even trying to recover it. There was $40 million in Health and Human Services mispayments that statutorily they were supposed to go after, and they let the statute of limitations run out on it. We shouldn't be doing that. We should be better stewards of our taxpayers' funds.
Senator, we also know that Minnesota has a rainy day fund, which is kind of like a financial safety net. But MMB said, this does not qualify as a rainy day. We need to solve the structural imbalance another way. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I agree with MMB. The rainy day fund is really there if we run into a cash flow problem. We put in a balanced budget and there's a shock to the system. Maybe tax collections come in much lower than we expect, or we see an increase in health care or the number of students going through Minnesota schools that causes our budgets to rise beyond what we predicted. That's what the rainy day fund is for. This is planful. And the fact of the matter is we are already in a deficit. Just this budget cycle, we are expected to spend $3.3 billion more than we bring in. That's a $9 billion swing from what we saw just 2 years ago.
Senator, we know that the budget is such a huge topic and so many people are invested in following it in the process. So is there anything you want to say about it that I haven't asked you about yet?
One of the things I said in the hearing was, we hear some people say, well, we passed a responsible budget. See, we have a $3 billion surplus. And what I've been telling Minnesotans is that surplus is spent. It's already encumbered. Unless we make some changes today, we are going to spend $3.3 billion more than we bring in taxes. And that's not sustainable. And I really hope my Democrat friends will see the same urgency that I do, because it's going to take us working across the aisle to get this solved. And so, again, my hope is everybody comes together and works on it this year and not try to push it down as a problem for 2 years from now.
Senator, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for being here.
Appreciate it.